The image on the screen is an Ingo Swann painting, but this is a particularly meaningful Ingo Swann painting. This is the painting that Ingo Swann did in your garage, right? In Adrian and Hal's garage, and gave to them as a wedding present. And this hangs, now it's in their home, but it's been in every office I've ever been in that belonged to Hal up until they closed down. So it's a marvelous example of his, I guess, Unseen Highway series, I think is what he formally calls it. And it was great when I take my students over to his lab for the lecture he does for us, to line them all up in front of that painting and take a picture of it. It was just great. So it is the 50-year anniversary, as we keep reminding you, just so you, in case you might forget, right? And there's an iconic photo of the two founders of the program itself. I think of Ingo as actually one of the founders, but in terms of the official record, right? The two founders, Hal and Russell, there's an iconic photo of them standing on the front steps of the headquarters building of SRI. And Russell's kind of leaning back against the rail, and he's looking at the camera, and Hal's over here on the top step, so they didn't look quite so short in relation to Russell. And I joke, in all good-natured fun, that it just looks like the Simon and Garfunkel remote viewing, you know? And yesterday, unfortunately, we missed Jeff Mishlev's talk, but fortunately, we had an awesome moment and opportunity to recreate, okay, go forward, recreate that iconic photo. Yeah. And I don't take any credit for this, because the one who actually did it was Judy Chatterton, who was able to insert herself in that conversation that we're having so long ago. Judy, would you stand up? It was her idea. Give her a big hand for coming up with this. Thank you. Okay, now, that's awesome. What I need to show you now is a few more results from the Outbounder, okay? So, Marilyn Schlitz emailed me right after it happened and said, nailed it, okay? And if you look at her sketch, everybody here knows what the target was now, right? Everybody knows? Okay. So notice her sketch. She's got these concentric circles, and over here, it's hard to say because she doesn't use a CRV format, but this may have been a sort of an AOL. She says satellite dish, and by, I think it says X city or X something, I don't know what that means, but a satellite dish. Okay, so she did really good on that, right? That's pretty amazing. But who here knows Gail Husick, or at least knows of her? So quite a few of you. This is Gail's session that she did. She was watching online. This is, whoops, went the wrong way. That's going to happen several times, I guarantee. This was Gail's session. Notice the sketch? That's pretty darn good, right? What's even more interesting is her AOL, Stanford dish. And that's a nail it, right? That's a nail it. Okay, good. So I just wanted to tell you about that. I got another one from, which I thought was pretty good, from Jana Roca, who is now the editor for Aperture and one of my students, and a very passionate remote viewer. But it's only verbal. I didn't want to, read you through her whole summary. But she did a decent job as well, as did many of you, including some in this room. So anyway, good job on the Outbounder, and we had an awesome time with that. I don't know if I and Julianne has such an awesome time. I put 5 miles on my Fitbit is what I did, but nonetheless. Okay, so let's get into my talk, which is CRV. In other words, controlled remote viewing is not the devil.
Say that now.
Okay, I don't know whether to stand back here or up there. I think up here is better, but I have to look at the screen then. So why do I say that? Well, let me see what my next slide is. Okay, I'm going to talk about myths and misunderstandings about CRV, okay? Because there are a lot of things out there said about CRV, and there's a certain contingent of the remote viewing community who, at least wants to hold it at arm's length, and some who are actually maybe kind of scared of it, I don't know. But I kind of understand in a way too, because it seems to be the dominant strain in many respects. And there's a human tendency to, if something kind of is dominating, to want to push back against that. So whatever the various reasons are, there's some reluctance to accept it in certain quarters. And I understand those motivations, but often things are said about CRV that just aren't true. And that's all I care about today, is clearing some of those up, okay? So here are some common misbeliefs: that IRV only allows CRV. CRV is all there is. CRV is way too strict and complicated. CRV was never validated scientifically. Prominent CRVers say CRV ain't great. Every CRV method is the same as every other CRV method. That should have been a new bullet there. CRV was totally invented by Ingo Swann, and CRV was created by the military. Or oftentimes it's CRV is too militaristic, okay? The one thing that all of those allegations have in common is that they're wrong, okay? And I'll explain why. Now, many people think of these and believe them sincerely, and they're not trying to be disingenuous or dishonest. They believe them. So I'm going to try and not be, what's the word for it? I don't want to be a attack dog on this, right? I don't want people to feel like I'm trying to attack them directly, except in a few well-deserved cases. But we'll wait until those, okay, right? So first, let me give you some background on CRV. But to give you background on CRV, I've got to talk to you about RV, right? So the first remote viewing experiment was done on December 8th, 1971. Somebody had a birthday here. Birthday on December 8th. Deborah Bear. It was Deborah. Is she still here? I don't hear her voice chirping. Okay, all right. So Deborah, yeah. So December 8th, 1971, it was performed at the headquarters of the American Society of Psychical Research. And Ingo Swann and Janet Mitchell were primary participants in this. And it was Ingo's idea. They did essentially, well, not exactly an outbounder. It was a remote viewing experiment. Ingo was trying to detect the weather in distant cities that he couldn't predict just by knowing what the city is. So cities that have kind of variable weather, it could be almost anything. And he would describe the weather there, and then they would call the weather service, National Weather Service there, and get their feedback, right? And that was the first remote viewing experiment. Here they are together. Oh no, that's the ASPR building at the time. They've moved out of the city now. And there is Janet and Ingo together as well, okay? Janet is really cool. There's a very nice interview with her in a recent issue of Aperture. You should get to know her. She's one of those unsung heroines. No, I don't use that word. That's got too loaded. Heroes of the remote viewing community. Okay. So probably the next most seminal event Hal was involved in, and that was when Ingo Swann successfully described the interior and affected the output of a very sophisticated scientific device. It's a magnetometer being used to try and detect quarks. Hal has described this experiment many times. In my YouTube channel, I have actually a video of him describing it, talking about that, and you can find that in many places, including my book, Reading the Enemy's Mind, which you don't have here. So anyway, that's a photo of the Varian Physics building where it occurred in the basement, and some of you folks very cleverly and industriously got into the basement of there without being arrested. That was awesome, okay? I really give you really a good thumbs up for that, right? So then it continued on from there at SRA. I won't give you a whole rundown, but what that sparked was what I call generic and what other people call free-form remote viewing. And that is sort of, each viewer had sort of their own way of going about it. Some of them had these little rituals, like Hella Hammett had to wear her magic socks or remote viewing socks, right? And Pat Price always had to clean his glasses before he started so he could see more clearly, right? So, and they each had kind of their own way of going about it. So it was very kind of ad hoc, and it was very successful, okay? Which I'm going to talk about that here in a minute. And some of the folks involved in that were like Pat and Hella, Keith Harari was involved in the remote viewing research as well. Dwayne Elgin, and many of you have not heard of him, was there. And Gary Langford, who I couldn't find a picture of anywhere. So I did find one that was really bad, just really grainy. So I am going to hunt him down and take his picture someday. Okay, so, and Gary was actually kind of, for a long time, probably one of the best ones you had, was he not, Hal? He was, so Dale talked about Rosemary Smith. I'm glad he finally found her, even though it's sad what happened to her. But Rosemary Smith was at FTD and actually indicated the location on a map of that downed Soviet reconnaissance aircraft. Gary Langford, Dale went out to California, interviewed him about this, and Gary Langford gave a very detailed description of the setting. And when those two things, the location and the description of the setting, came together, it was a very strong match for where the aircraft was located, and it allowed them to find it. And we know that because Jimmy Carter confirmed it on at least 2 occasions that happened. Okay. All right, so let's get to the CRV part of this, the CRV timeline. So for the first almost 10 years, it was only, as I say, GRV or freeform remote viewing. And then SRI got a tasking from the Army INSCOM, which was starting to come online at that point as one of their main contracting offices, right? 79 to 80, roughly, they wanted a systematic approach to remote viewing developed that they could then use to transfer this skill onto people who may be not ever, have any particular proclivity for it. Okay. And as Hal said in an interview, SRI received a request by General Ed Thompson, who was at the time the AXI, or the Army, okay, I get this right, Army Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence, okay, the senior intelligence officer in the U.S. Army. He requested they develop some kind of training regimen that might be broadly applied to intelligence officers new to the concept of remote viewing. That's a direct quote from Hal. He could give you that same quote right now, but I won't bother him with that, okay? All right. And so from 80 to 81, Hal and Ingo are working together to bring in all of the data and information and understandings and knowledge that they'd gained, along with assistance from the people in the office, I'm sure, at SRI, to develop at least the early stages of CRV. And you can see some of these practice sessions, I won't say practice, research sessions that Hal and Ingo did. Hal has told me, well, Ingo said they did thousands of sessions. Hal has admitted at least hundreds. They did like dozens in a day, I think, didn't you? Something like that? Many, many, many sessions, day in, day out, and they kept what worked. In other words, the idea wasn't to keep the paper. The idea was to keep the understandings of the process that they got. They kept what worked, codified it, figured it out, kept this kind of a systematic record of it. And what didn't work, they just, it ended up on the cutting room floor. Okay, so this was a very laborious effort that they were engaged in. Then in March 81, that's the earliest I can find, and there may be earlier, but that's the earliest I can find, the first CRV training session. And it was a stage 1, and you'll see some of the people who were on these. So I should tell you, these target folders, which I want to get out to the archives again, that'll be my 3rd trip, and I never have enough time. It's usually overnight, right? I want to spend a week out there, and those target folders have got to be somewhere, and they give a complete documentary history of who did what sessions when. Ingo wrote down their names and their dates on every target folder of the targets they did during this entire training process. So there were stacks and stacks of them. I went to visit him in 2010, and he was very paranoid, and maybe that's not the right word, but that's the word I'm going to use. He's very paranoid about me getting my hands on his stuff, right? Because he knew I was very eager to try and understand this. That's the historian in me. I want the historical facts. I don't want just stories. I want the actual data, right? So he was very paranoid about that. But he was getting old and lazy. So he went off to the bathroom or something, and I saw these folders standing there, and so I started taking pictures. I move a folder, picture, so I didn't get a lot of them because he came back pretty quick, but I got some of them, and it's a blessing I did. It's a blessing I did because I was able to at least get some idea about how these things unfolded. Okay, so some of the people involved. One was a woman named Julia Turchuk, who I think she was actually a friend of Ingo's, but did she work? I think I asked you this question. Did she work at SRI, do you know? I'm really glad to have Hal here.
She was a friend of Ingo's.
Yeah.
Hung out with him in New York City.
Yeah.
Came out to SRI 2 or 3 times to train with Ingo and me. And
I should have asked you that question. I thought Hal would want to have that. So Tom has just given me a nice bit of new information, right? And that Julia Turchik was a friend of Ingo's in New York City, but she came out to SRI to do some training with him, some CRV training with him. And you met her, I guess.
several times.
So Tom met her several times. I don't think I ever met her. It's possible I did, but I don't recall.
And she passed away the same year that Ingo did.
She passed away in 2013. Okay. All right. So anyway, Julia Turchik and Marcia Adams, who's still with us. She lives in Arizona, and she was a speaker at one of our IRVA conferences. She was known as the Earthquake Lady because her task, one of her activities was to see if through, I guess it was like the electromagnetic impulses and stuff, that whether people and animals could predict earthquakes. Wasn't that how it worked, Hal? Something like that. And she also had a contract to determine if remote viewers.
She connected the wires up to trees.
Ah.
All kinds of
Yeah, ELF. So, yeah, so one of the things, you can go back and watch her video in a previous IRVA conference, and I'd like to actually get some more info from her for public dissemination. So anyway, but Marcia Adams did some work there. It got some training, and my goodness, who's that in the upper right corner there? Who is? Oh, Hal. Well, Hal actually did some stage 1 CRVs, and maybe even a stage 2 or 2, right? But also, interestingly, Jacques Vallée, okay? And there are a few other folks, but this gives you a flavor of who is being trained as proof of principle. These guys were in the developmental process. They were part of the developmental process. And then Tom and Rob Cowart.
You swore you were never going to use that.
So this was during the era of don't ask, don't tell. Yeah, no, I get a real kick out of this, but frankly, Tom has said that there's only 2 photos that he knows of Rob Cowart. And this was the one that you could see Rob the best in. So that's the one I used. Plus, Tom needs a little humbling every now and again. Yeah, getting good. Yeah. I'll Photoshop you out, and then, I know, I'll Photoshop you out, Tom, and then I'll Photoshop Faye in. Okay, all right. Then in 1984, Bill Ray, Charlene Kavanaugh Schufelt, I put that in there because she had 2 different names during the period. She got married to General Schufelt, who was an awesome guy. And myself, we began our formal training in the Centerlink program in the CRV. Ed Dames was included along as kind of an ad hoc addition from another organization who decided they wanted to see, if they could get their own people working. So anyway, we trained with Ingo, and as you'll note, this is the famous 5, right? There's Bill. You would never know that's me because it has hair and is relatively skinnier. There's Ed Dames and Ingo, of course, and Charlene, who really liked this picture of her arm around Ingo and Ingo's hand on her thigh. And Tom McNear, okay? So that was awesome. That was awesome time. We spent time out at SRI, which is where I first met Hal, and back and forth, between New York and SRI for our training. Okay, so yes, June '84, Tom completed his training. You can see one of his stage 6s here. You can see why Ingo thought of him as his best ever student. He just did magical work, absolutely magical work. And that was awesome. Now, we finished at the end of '84, but the contract did too. There are some rumors out there, that Ingo was fired. No, that did not happen. Ingo and SRI were not fired exactly. What happened was they got rid, literally the Army got rid of Bert Stubblebine, the guy who was our patron at that time, the guy who in charge of INSCOM and making this stuff happen. And they brought in a general whose assignment was to get rid of this stuff. So the Army just, the leadership was skeptical. They didn't want to have this thing going on in the Army. Stupidly, in my opinion, they got rid of it. And so that's why that training ended. But fortunately, Tom was the only person ever fully trained in CRV up to that time. He was very thoroughly familiar with it, having spent 3 years, I think, and we figured out with Ingo. And Ingo, he actually kind of became Ingo's, it was kind of a friend, son he never had, and mascot. It was kind of like those three things. And so Tom got a really thorough exposure to CRV. Skip Atwater also really dug into this, and those two are the ones that trained the rest of us up to stage 6. The rest of us three, Bill and Charlene and myself. And so that's how the whole CRV finally came together. And then Tom moved on to a command assignment, which he needed for promotion, and I got tagged as the instructor, basically. I wrote the manual and all that. So that's where we get from there. But there's more CRV stuff to be detailed. So in December '84, that's where we finished stage 3. The DIA manual was published in May of 1986. April of '94, Jim Schnabel and Bob Durant succeeded in prevailing on Ingo to train them. I have an interview with Ingo where he said, well, you know, Durant was wanting to write a book, and he wanted to get the training. He was going to go off to Ed Dames, and I thought about it, and I said, why should Ed Dames get his money? You know, maybe I'm going to train him, right? And Bob then came along on board, and that was great because these guys did some really, really cool stuff. Which I'm wondering, I should have, well, I don't know if Ellie knows. They built a couple of, they went all the way through stage 6 in an abbreviated format and built clay models. You saw Tom's clay model here, stage 6 clay model. Theirs was just astonishing, very impressive. And here's Bob with Ingo in 2010 when I was visiting. I got them together. Okay, so then in 95 to 96, that's right after the program was declassified, Ingo sent out a letter in which he asked the name be changed from coordinate remote viewing, which we called it up to that point, to controlled remote viewing. And I had eyes on that letter about 4 months ago, and I can't find it. So if any of you can figure out where that, if you can find a copy of the letter, let me know, but I'm going to keep looking for it. But he did request that, and everybody subsequently started calling it controlled remote viewing. The reason being, coordinates can be used to task you on any kind of remote viewing. It really doesn't pick out this 6-stage methodology that Hal and Ingo came up with. So, and plus the idea is that the viewer has control of the process. You know, just being freeform psychic, you sort of the process is in control of you. You get what you get, right? You don't really narrow in on what the desired target is, particularly the way you can with CRV and certain other kinds of remote viewing. And so coordinates are just a way of getting you there. Controlled remote viewing refers to the control that the viewer is supposed to take, the ownership the viewer is supposed to take of the process. Okay. All right. And then 98, the DIA manual was released to the public by Palin Gaynor. Some of you know her, or at least know of her. I was opposed to that for a long time because I realized that the manual itself as a standalone doesn't necessarily answer all the questions, and people can interpret how they want, and things get really confused. Did everything get confused, guys? Yeah. Everything got confused. But she released it, and it would have inevitably come out anyway. So that's when the manual came out. A little bit later, Tom's earlier version of that, remote viewing stages 1 through 6 and beyond, or whatever the title is, later that came out, and it's interesting to compare the two, because you can definitely see that the manual that I oversaw the compilation of really owes a lot to Tom's earlier version. Okay, 2000 and then 2010 plus, Ingo's final trainee, who was Tom B. He prefers to remain a little incognito, but I have to put the B there to de-confuse you that it's not Tom M, right? So he trained beyond that, but I can't find a record of him training beyond that. I've seen his name on target folders up to 2010. And I think he trained for at least another year or two, probably, and maybe Tom knows, I don't know. Well, one of the Toms knows, don't they? Okay, Tom Bergen knows. You think it was 2012? Okay.
Less frequently, but right up until 2012.
Okay, so it got less and less often up till then. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so the misunderstandings about CRV. That's the background. Maybe I should pause just for a moment. Is there anything confusing about that? Everybody kind of got a feel for that sequence. Okay. Oh, just a comment. Okay. Or a gasp, maybe it was a gasp. So the first one I want to talk about is this idea that IRVA only tolerates CRV. All other forms of RV are ignored, okay? And there are particularly a couple of very prominently known people in the remote viewing community who keep saying this. And when we start, well, let me show you this. Okay, so these are the founding members of IRVA, and I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this, but we'll see. And these are their remote viewing affiliations, right? In light blue are those who are CRVers, and then in white are ones who are something else or maybe a mix of things. So, you know, Hal, I have him down as RV-CRV because he helped develop CRV, right? Next to him is Dave Hathcock, who is a CRV, but a student. You know, he studies CRV with Lynn and me, and I think some other folks, if I remember right. And next to him is John Alexander, who didn't do remote viewing at all. Next to John is Lynn, and next to Lynn is me, both of whom are very much embedded CRV guys. And next to them is Skip Atwater, who did way more ERV as a monitor and a manager than he did CRV. And he never really developed a great love of CRV. He ran us all on CRV sessions and stuff, but his first love was really the ERV, which he had a hand in developing, which was related to the Monroe Institute, which was his first love, really. Okay, next to him is Angela. Angela, are you here? So I'm calling you ERV, CRV, but it's really, that's even too simplistic. You're kind of a lot of different things, right? Yeah. And of course you start out at the Paralab where they were freeform RV, although it was precognitive remote viewing, but still so your background, even though it has some CRV content, you're not exclusively a CRVer, or even largely a CRVer, right? So, and then Marcello Truzzi, our skeptic, who was none, and then you have Russell Targ and Stephen Schwartz, who are just freeform RV, and in fact are both very much opposed to CRV, right? These are the founders. Does that look like it's a CRV heavy outfit? No. And then if you go to the presidents, all the past presidents, here are the CRVers versus the non-CRVers. Pam Coronado is CRV, and these are in blue because they're mixed as well. Pam is a lot of things, not just CRV. John Cook didn't even do CRV until after he was long president of IRVA, and then he finally came and took my class at some point. The only two solid CRVers are me and my other advanced course student, John Stoller. Everybody else is a non-CRVer, okay? So once again, I say, does it sound like IRVA is CRV-centric? It's really not. In fact, I've worked very hard when I was president and vice president and as a director to keep IRVA open to everything that can reasonably be construed as remote viewing or related to remote viewing. And I think we are successful at that. So if you ever hear anybody say that IRVA is biased towards CRV, that is totally false. And I will argue with them anytime they're willing to take that risk of being argued with by me. So, okay, so that's a misconception. I don't even know how long I've got. How long do I have? Oh no, Deborah, you have no say in this anymore. Okay, what happened? Oh yes, right. So the next thing is CRV is all there is. Now this is kind of pushing back against the other side of it. I often hear people use the term CRV and think it applies to every kind of remote viewing there is. No, it doesn't. There is CRV, there is GRV, and then there's different flavors usually derived from CRV, right? And the pre-CRV work, there is some of that pre-CRV work and even currently done non-CRV work that is every bit as good as the best CRV stuff. Okay? You don't have to be our CRVer to be successful at remote viewing. And keep that in mind. Be very careful when you talk about remote viewing to know what your domain that you're talking about. Are you talking about just CRV? Then CRV is great. If you're talking about remote viewing as a whole, don't call it CRV because it's not all CRV. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is just to be precise. Another one is because people who aren't CRVers don't like to be called CRVers, right? Particularly, for example, and I'll name names here, Joe McMonigle. He really gets a pained expression on his face when somebody says, oh, Joe, how do you like CRV? And he'll give you an earful that you may not have expected, right? So just be aware of the difference in these terms, okay? All right. CRV came exclusively out of Ingo Swann's head. Okay, I've heard that said. No. In fact, I'm going to name names here. Stephen Schwartz says, Ingo Swann made it all up. It just came out of his head, and that's all there is to it. Totally wrong, totally wrong. I think I have a quote from Hal here. Yes, so this is something Hal also said in an interview. He said, given, and he's talking about General Thompson, given General Thompson's request under contract, we at SRI began to examine the RV process in detail over a large database of RV results. So these are GRV, freeform RV results he's talking about here. Began to examine the RV process in detail over a large database of RV results already in hand to determine if we could extract principles that might be useful to a novice, to develop a starter kit, as it were, okay? So he's already saying that they mined the data they had already developed to inform their development of CRV, right? Then he said, Ingo's contribution as one of our primary consultants was without a doubt a significant input. But input from other remote viewers, data from studies in subliminal perception, advice from consultants in the neurophysiology of right brain versus left brain functioning, and detailed reference work and analysis by SRI personnel were all part of the mix that led to SRI's development of the CRV process. Okay, does that sound like it all came out of Ingo's head? No. It was a very concrete, detailed, and conscientious effort to capture all the lessons learned that they had up to that point to create this approach that we call CRV today. And I should give credit, this interview comes from one of Daz Smith's 8 Martinis issues, and Daz has rendered a real service for capturing this stuff. And so I appreciate that. All right. CRV was created by the military. I'll treat the seven parentheses in a moment. It should be very obvious by now it wasn't created by the military. Now, it might have been created for the military. Technically, that's true. But the military didn't do it. They contracted with a civilian organization, right down the street, actually, over here. They contracted with a civilian organization to use material that was gleaned from other civilians working as subjects and such to create the process, and the military itself just bought the product. They didn't make it, right? Okay, so is it too militaristic? Well, I suppose that depends on your perspective. It's really geared to the vagaries and the foibles and the missteps of human perception in general. Okay? This is aimed to manage the problems we have when we try and perceive things in a very narrow bandwidth environment where we're not getting a lot of information through. That was the goal. It wasn't to make it suitable for the military. It was to try and manage human perception, human sensory participation in the signal line, all that stuff. And that's what it is. It's scientific. It's not militaristic. It's scientific. And it's that way because of the way humans function, whether they be military or civilian or whatever humans can be. Okay? All right. CRV is way too strict and complicated. Well, this is a CRV session. I'm not going to go through every little detail that came in. This is just so you can get a look at it. It's one I did. You can see, yeah, there's a lot of different things going on this page. But again, remember what I said. CRV is designed to weed out the noise, essentially, that our human perceptual systems just naturally generate. And so there are reasons for all of these things that we do on the page. Okay, there's the sketch, more stuff. There's the summary. Oh, will somebody read that for me? Never mind. I have done you a favor and I have put it in there. Now, Jimmy, can you read that from where you're sitting? Why don't you read? Oh, no, I have to stand over here by you so you can hear. I'll let you read it because your voice is better. Okay.
Summary. Target is a large configured building with a non-streamlined profile. It's very tall, but much wider and longer than tall. Seems to be in an urban setting with streets nearby. Voluminous inside, but with many smaller partitions and compartments. Cubicles. Lots of people visit, especially in groups and throngs. Some of them at least seem to be observing, examining, admiring, scrutinizing, which they find enjoyable, fascinating, and intriguing. Further impression of areas partitioned to sense, perceive, and display, you need to use Oxford commas, collective groupings of items, suggest the AOL signal of museum, arboretum, or similar facility.
Thank you. Nicely done. Yes. And in a world where, oh no, sorry. Yeah, got carried away. Okay, so that's pretty detailed, isn't it? That came out of that session. And on top of that, there's more information in the session that wasn't added into this summary, right? So that's pretty thorough. So here, obviously, the complexity helped that. Now you're saying, well, what the heck is the target? How do we know if that even makes any sense, right? So here is the target. It's the Pacific Science Center and Museum in Seattle. And you can see the sketch compared to the structure, the actual structure. And yeah, it's not exact, it's not precise, but it's really close, right? So, so you can see that's just a standard CRV session, and you can see the value that you can get from these things, right? So it may be complex, it may be detailed, it may be disciplined, but that's a virtue, okay? One of the reasons Ingo's constructed it this way, based on all these things that they've learned, was because the structure itself gives the left brain something to do that it's good at, right? And it helps cut down on the overlays that you get because the left brain's busy figuring out where to put things. It doesn't have as much time to say, oh, it's a rabbit. Oh, no, squirrel. Oh, it's a squirrel. No, okay, yeah. So the structure, the rigor of it actually serves a functional purpose. And most people don't understand that. It isn't complicated just to be complicated. It's complicated because it actually helps the process. Okay. People are milling. I think maybe I'm running into time constraints here. We'll see. CRV is way too oh, I'm sorry, I just answered that one. Okay. So it's based, well, yeah, it's based on actual research. It's complicated because it's based on actual research into how human perception works. It's based on literally thousands of experimental sessions and results. This is kind of a review, isn't it? It gives the left brain something to do that it's good at. Provides a mechanism for sorting signal from noise. You don't find this in any other psychic modality. This is unique to remote viewing and specifically to CRV. to really recognize this existence of mental noise and come up with a way of dealing with it, a codified, rule-based way of dealing with it, okay? Yes, and some of the CRV systems have kind of added stuff that may not necessarily need to be there, right? But so then that may add to some of the perceptions that it's complicated, I don't know. But that's something, possibility. It is no more complicated than it has to be to achieve its intended purpose, and it works. Dang it, that's the bottom line. It works, and it has proven itself to work over and over again. All right. So why do some people think it's too complicated? You know what, I'm not even going to bother with that because they want me to quit. So every other CRV method, every CRV method is the same as every other CRV method. So there's a perception that if you're doing CRV, the way one teacher teaches CRV is just like the way some other teacher teaches CRV. But it isn't monolithic. And I'm going to show you the kind of the family tree of the CRV style approaches. And this is not to say if one is better than the other, it's just to let you know about how these differences exist, all right? So first off, starts off with the original Ingo Swann CRV. And then I call it the McNear, Smith, Ray, and Dames approach. I left Charlene Schufeld out because she didn't stick around very long after the training. So this is the approach we learned from Ingo. And then Dames split off and did his own thing he called TRV, and that has morphed and become less and less like CRV as it's gone along. And then I continued on in my approach, and Lynn, who was trained by us there, sort of by Dames, but mostly by me and Ray and McNear, and Atwater should be on that list too, trained Lynn, and he's developed his own approach to CRV that has, you know, its core is the same, but the peripherals are somewhat different, okay? And then from Dames, well, and then Morehouse also was a spinoff, and then Dames, TRV brought out, I'm starting to get rattled here because I'm in a hurry, right? So Courtney Brown developed CRV from Dames's TRV, and then Prudence Calabrese developed Transdimensional Systems TDS from Brown's SRV. Now, let me add this. When I say from this, there are ancillary things that come in as well, okay? It isn't that for example, Transdimensional Systems depends strictly on SRV. Prudence added some of her own insights and ideas into her approach. But that's how it works. And frankly, I like to say that I believe that my CRV program is as close to Ingo Swann's as you're going to get. And so far, Tom and Bill agree with me, so that's kind of an endorsement there. And so, but that doesn't necessarily mean that these others don't work or that they're bad. It's just that they're different, right? And ultimately, I think we'll probably come up with some kind of testing mechanism that can tell us if one works better than the other, but we are definitely not there yet. So if somebody says, well, mine is better than yours, that's a subjective evaluation, right? Okay, CRV was never validated scientifically. Yes, it was. I'll just say that. Hal, I think I have a quote from him. This is from a document where we actually, they actually validated CRV in a double-blind setting, 200 sessions, 100 before, 100 after training, and proved that CRV actually works. And let me see if I actually have no, I don't. I thought I had a quote. Okay, so in fact, Hal, you want to give a soundbite about? I'll stand over by you.
Well, we ran someone through just ordinary free-form remote viewing, and you can see in the upper graph, it turns out to be something like a third of their experiments came out pretty well. But then we went through the CRV process with the same person, and then did another 100 trials. In this case, the sort of 33% level jumped up to 66% level. So we felt that was basically a validation that use of the CRV process actually increased the quality of the output of the remote viewing.
So what you're telling me is that CRV was scientifically evaluated under double-blind conditions and proved to be successful.
Yep, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, good for you, thanks. Okay, prominent CRVers say CRV isn't great, and that is largely Tom is accused of this. So this is Joe McMoneagle again. Joe says, well, I'll tell you that in a second. Here's Tom, before and after. I'm not sure before what or after what, but okay. So allegedly, during the time we were all training with Ingo Swann, Joe says that he had a conversation with Tom at the unit, and Tom told him that CRV, well, you can read what it says. Tell me if I get this wrong, Tom. Tom said that CRV training had stifled his native psychic ability. Joe's made that claim more than once, okay? And then later he said, when he encountered Tom later at a movie theater, Tom said CRV training had stifled his native psychic ability again, right? Or at least didn't improve it. That's what should be in that bullet. Didn't improve it a bit. In other words, it didn't work for him, okay? Well, we'll see if this works. I need the audio and video. Okay.
I never said that Ingo interfered with my natural psychicness, that his CRV training in any way interfered. In fact, it enhanced my remote viewing abilities.
Soundbite. That's a sound bite of a much larger interview, a relatively larger interview that I will publish once I get back home, put up on the web. After Tom gets to look at it and it makes me take all his cuss words out. No, I'm just kidding, just kidding. Okay. So I'm not going to talk about this. This is too long a topic. I'll just say this, that there are claims out there that Ingo Swann changed CRV significantly after he finished training with us. Tom and I have worked on an extensive line of paper with Bill Ray included, and in fact, Tom B., Ingo's final trainee, and we refute this. Were there changes? Well, the way he explained it, there were changes, but the overall concept was never changed in any significant way whatsoever. And so I won't go into detail on that because we're out of time, but there you go. So that's based on these things, and there you go. There's Ingo reading my book. You can see how astonished he was. Thank you. No. Thank you, folks.